It's been said that the whole Bible points to the person of Jesus Christ. But how can this be, since most of the Bible was written before Jesus' birth? Many have thought that the word Christ is Jesus' last name, but that is not so. Christ is a Greek translation from the Hebrew word Messiah, which means anointed one or chosen one. All throughout the Hebrew scriptures we see passages that tell of this Messiah, prophesying of his future coming and foretelling many details that are to take place in his life. To understand this fully, we must go back to the beginning, to the book of Genesis. According to the Hebrew scriptures, the first Jewish patriarch was a man named Abraham, who lived about 2,000 years before Christ. God revealed himself to Abraham in the city of Haran, in modern-day Turkey. Abraham's wife Sarah was barren, but God made a promise to Abraham, saying to him that he was going to have a son. And from his offspring, all of the nations of the earth were to be blessed. This is one of the first prophecies about the Messiah in the Bible. As we study this text, we see that the offspring is not referring to Abraham's coming children or grandchildren, but it is speaking of a Messiah that will come through Abraham's line in the distant future, and in him all of the nations of the earth were to be blessed. Abraham and Sarah gave birth to their promised son, and they named him Isaac. God revealed himself to Isaac later in his life and shared with him this promise also. Isaac would have a son named Jacob. God revealed himself to Jacob in the city of Bethel and gave him a new name, Israel. Jacob would have 12 sons, and from those 12 sons would come the 12 tribes of Israel. As Jacob was traveling through the desert, he lay down to sleep one night, and God gave him a dream. It was a dream of a stairway reaching from earth to heaven. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a stairway set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. This was a prophetic dream about the coming Messiah that Jacob had. It was a sign that the Messiah would create a way for men to reach heaven. In the years to come, the people of Israel would flee to Egypt to escape famine in their land. They would prosper greatly in Egypt and become a very large people group. The Pharaoh of Egypt would come to fear the people of Israel and their prosperity, and he began to enslave them and force them to do hard labor. After 400 years in the land of Egypt, God heard their cry, and he chose a man named Moses to lead the Hebrew people out of slavery in Egypt to Kadesh Barnea, their promised land. Through the hand of Moses, God performed incredible miracles, signs, and plagues to force the hand of Pharaoh to free his people. The final plague that God used to free Israel was allowing the angel of death to enter Egypt and kill every firstborn child. God gave Israel a command at this time to save them from death. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Tell the community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his household, and they must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses. On that same night I will pass through Egypt, and I will strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt." Why would God tell Israel to sacrifice a lamb and wipe its blood on their door frames? What is the meaning of this? It is this: these events were orchestrated by God to be a foreshadowing of a coming Messiah, a coming Savior to free the people. That spotless lamb that was sacrificed to save the people from death, it was a foreshadowing of a sinless Messiah who was to come to be a sacrifice to save his people from eternal death. God would rescue Israel and bring them into the promised land, just as this Messiah would one day rescue his people and bring them into the final promised land, a place called heaven. The people of Israel entered the promised land, and several hundred years later God raised up a king in Israel named David, the same David who slew the Goliath. God made a promise to David similar to Abraham's promise. God revealed to him that the Messiah would come through his offspring, saying, "When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever." David would also foretell that this Messiah would be called the Son of God, as well as how he would die, piercing of his hands and feet, hundreds of years before crucifixion was even invented. Over the next several hundred years, God would proclaim many prophecies about this coming Messiah through Israel's prophets. 700 years before Christ, the prophet Isaiah would proclaim that the Messiah would be born of a virgin, and he would be called Emmanuel, God with us. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Isaiah also prophesied about the Messiah's birth in chapter 9. For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. At that same time in history, the prophet Micah prophesied that the Messiah would be born in the town of Bethlehem, and that his greatness would spread throughout the entire world. But you, Bethlehem, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come from me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they will live securely, for then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth. Throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, there are many prophecies about the Messiah that Jesus uniquely fulfills, over 300, but none is more powerful than the prophecy found in Isaiah chapter 53. It may be the greatest chapter in the entire Bible. 700 years before the birth of Christ, Isaiah foretells with great detail much of what is to take place in the life of the Messiah. The entire chapter is truly astounding in how well it depicts the events in the life of Jesus. For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of parched ground. He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely our griefs he bore, and our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteem him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The chastising of our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before its shears, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. As for his generation, who considered that he was cut off from the land of the living. Because he poured out himself to death, and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he himself bore the sin of many, and interceded for the transgressors. Because he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. All of us, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, but the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. His grave was assigned with the wicked men, yet he was with the rich men in his death. He will see his offspring, he will prolong his days, and the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand. All of these prophecies are like clues or puzzle pieces that God has graciously given to us, so that when we put them all together, we can be certain of just who this Messiah is. It is a clear portrait of the God-man, Jesus Christ.